Hello, my name is Renee Timmers from the Department of Music, University of Sheffield. Welcome to this launch of iResearch Music podcasts, which will be led by Tom McKinney, who will interview three of the podcast contributors.
Thank you, Renee. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us all. Just tell you a bit of background how I got involved in these podcasts. It's because of my work with Music in the Round in Sheffield. Music in the Round is a concert organisation based at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield. We put on concerts all over the UK, chamber music concerts, and I am one of the team, part of the team of concert programmers. So that's how my links to Sheffield University is by this organisation, Music in the Round, based in Sheffield. I also work as a broadcaster at Radio 3. I'm also a performer, classical guitarist, and I also teach classical guitar at the Royal Northern College of Music. The thing is, the subjects that we're going to be talking about this morning, the subjects that are covered in these podcasts, from my point of view, my work in life, they are right at the forefront of what everyone who puts on concerts are thinking about. And that is, how does musical performance fundamentally work? How can music actually be a form of communication? How does music work as a language that can be processed to give meaning in the same way that words and images can give meaning? And for me, looking at how we put concerts on and the future of how we put concerts on, especially at the moment, digital application, how we actually put concerts on online, everything is changing. And the research that's come out of these podcasts that I've learned a huge amount from, I think that by having a better understanding of the issues in these podcasts today, a better understanding of the ideas of musical communication, from my professional position, I want to put on great concerts, and I want composers to write great music, and I want performers to fantastic performances, because ultimately that creates a better audience experience, which is ultimately what we want to do in my line of work. That's my personal interest in all of this. So how can this research be applied to making the audience experience even better? And I've learned, as I say, I've learned a huge amount in the process of getting to know about these subjects, talking to Renee, talking to the researchers who will be joining us this morning. So I've had just a very, very tiny part of these podcasts, just facilitating the actual recording of them. I've not had any involvement in the research at all. The podcasts were recorded in two stages. So the first took place last summer, the summer of 2019, and then the start of this year, that was the second period of recording. And this morning, I'll be speaking to three of the researchers at the Department of Music in the University of Sheffield about their particular podcast that they recorded with me. Now, the three topics we covered as part of their research were, well, our guests will go into these in a lot more detail, but I'll just give you a quick summary. So there's music, colour, synaesthesia, expressive performance of music, and music and space. So just very briefly, music, colour, synaesthesia. So what we're talking about here is how the listener can experience colours and shapes, other sensations, whilst simultaneously listening to music. The second topic is expressive performance of music, which is really asking, what is that emotional content and expression that performers add to music, and how do they add, shape, and define the emotion and meaning of music? And as we'll see, the research has led to this question of, can we even teach? Is there a formula for teaching the idea of musical expression? And the final topic is music and space. So that's the role of the environment, acoustics, the venue in which we listen to music, which can vary from choral performances in churches to something very intimate like how we listen to music through headphones. But we're in particular focusing on how you add a sense of space into recorded music. So a sense of kind of three-dimensional space within recorded music. I'd say these are going to be elaborated on in much more detail by people who have real expertise in these fields. Now, these podcasts, they've come about through the initiative and collaboration of the Music Mind Machine Research Centre. And that offers a platform for researchers and students to investigate musical experience from an interdisciplinary perspective. So it combines theories and methods from music, psychology, social sciences, and computational sciences. So we'll get on to the chats with our three guests. We've got Dr. Henrique Meissner, who's a former PhD student. We've got Jake Downs, who's a current PhD student, and we're going to start this morning with Caroline Curwen, PhD student, and hopefully she's here. Caroline, good morning.
Yes, good morning.
She is indeed here. Hi. So, but where are you at the moment, Caroline? Where is lockdown at the moment?
Where I'm in our front room at the moment. Yeah, so I'm in Stockport. Yeah, so.
Stockport. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So your podcast topic, music, colour, synaesthesia. Now, I first heard of this term when I was a teenager, synaesthesia, when I started to get interested in music of Olivier Messiaen, probably the most well-known composer associated with synaesthesia, not the only one by any means. But how did you get into synaesthesia? What sparked your interest?
Well, what sparked my interest was when I actually started my master's in music psychology at Sheffield, and we had a particular session on cross-modal correspondences, and Renee actually came up and started talking about it. And we have two blocks of colour on the screen, one blue and one red, and she's explaining that some people might associate the red colour with A major and the blue colour with C major. And it just occurred to me that was the wrong way round for me. And then the word synaesthesia came. I thought, I do that. And it was actually the first time that I realised it had a name, and it was something that not everybody did. So it wasn't until really, maybe only 5 or 6 years ago that I realised it was a thing.
So you are a synaesthete, is that right? That's
the
right term, synaesthete, yeah?
Yeah, I've got it for, I have a really strong association of colours with musical keys, and for letters, days of the month, days of the week, and months, and you know, so yeah, it's sort of, I've got a combination of things. And,
so with you, it's music associated with colour and shape. Do you have any other types of synaesthesia?
Yeah, sure. Letters and numbers, they call it grapheme colour synaesthesia. So I get a really strong sensation of colour with, say, numbers. I've got like one is black, 2 is yellow, 3 is red for me. But, you know, they're really quite. They're not really. I don't really see it. I just have a feeling of colour related with those. I've always had it. And days of the week as well. The days, for example, if I'm thinking about a week ahead, I'll have all the days of the week from Monday to Friday are sort of low down and have various different colours. Saturday and Sunday are raised above the rest of the week, and they're sort of brighter colours. And the days may take a sort of a certain hue depending on what I've got to do that day, if it's a good thing or a bad thing and stuff. Yeah, so I can see quite a long way ahead and behind in my mind's eye, so to speak. Yeah.
I just wondered this because I mean I remember reading about Messiaen in particular, who when he heard a particular, I can't remember what the key was, but he saw what he said was Prussian blue with explosions of stars.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that sometimes was a blessing or a curse. I mean, does it get in the way sometimes of what you do? Can it be a frustration?
The thing is, there's so many different types of synaesthesia associated with music. So what Messiaen's describing is possibly on hearing a certain pitch, you might get a certain colour. That's one that is sort of akin to what we call tone colour synaesthesia. You can get it on individual tones as well, almost, and there have been comparisons with like absolute pitch, as we understand it. So like labelling a tone with a colour or a name. But there's other types, which, you know, some types of music colour synaesthesia, you might need the whole piece to play or something to earn, and it might change with the timbre, there might be instrumentation. So there's more of a context involved in the musical piece that brings about the colour. So for me, it doesn't get in the way. I don't have absolute pitch. It isn't, and it's just sort of like if someone says to me, this key is in D major, this piece is in D major, I might get a sort of sense of a brighter yellowy sort of hue, and if it actually transpires to be in A major, it doesn't make any difference to me at all. It's sort of like the concept of that particular key has certain connotations. The Messiaen, it might have been quite different, and from other people they may have very specific colours to do with individual tones that they hear. I don't personally necessarily have to hear the pitch to get the meaning of the key. So possibly.
So what has the specifics of your research been then?
Okay, well, I've been trying to investigate just like the differences in the way people experience music. So for some people, we might have synaesthesia, and some people may not. I mean, typical cognition. Yeah, sort of most people associate, you know, higher pitches with a lighter colour or a higher spatial place, so like you're thinking about high pitch be up rather than down, etc. So those sort of commonalities are reflected in synesthetic associations as well. So I'm trying to see whether or not, trying to explore if synesthesia is on a sort of continuum and it's sort of like part of general cognition, maybe not so very different at all. Maybe just some people have developed a method of dealing with abstract concepts like music, unfolding over time and that sort of thing. And it's slightly different, but not only difference being it's a conscious percept of the sort of thing for synesthetes and not for individual cognition. But I'm trying to see, trying to look at synesthesia not as a separate condition all on its own, but as part of general cognition that we all may be part of to a certain degree.
And just one final thing: is how do you go about doing the research? And what's the actual method for gathering data?
Well, gathering data is difficult because essentially most of the evidence we get about people having synesthesia is by self-report, and nobody really knows what anybody's experience is like unless you're in their head. So there are this has always been a very difficult part of synesthesia research, and there aren't so very many synesthetes about, so to speak. Generally, very roughly, it's about 4% of the population will be aware that they have some form of synesthesia. So it's difficult to get a decent group of participants, and then you're relying on their own self-report. So you try and look. Generally, though, with synesthesia, there is consistency over time in the colours people choose. So, for example, all the colours I have for my keys are exactly the same as they were when I was 10. You haven't changed over all the time. So you tend to use a consistency test to see, you might test someone for colours 1 week and 2 months later do it again. And depending on the consistency, you can sort of say, okay, some kind of synesthesia is there. And also you can use behavioural tests such as Stroop tests, which, I mean, if you don't know what a Stroop test is necessarily, but a common one is when people have names of colours written in the wrong colour and you're trying to read the colour as it is, and there's some interference between the way that the colour. So I do a similar test where I might present a key written in blue, and for the synesthete, that particular synesthete, it's red. So they're trying to name the key and it's the wrong colour, and there's a slower reaction time than saying that. So there's some interference there, which demonstrates that the synesthesia is present. But it's quite difficult, actually. It's not an easy thing to research at all because of this. There are so many different types of synesthesias, and music, even within music colour synesthesia, there's many people have it for composers or genres or styles of instrumentation or tone or huge pieces of music. There's a lot of variety. So it's quite hard.
Well, Caroline, look, thank you so much. As I said, the podcast is about to be launched, so we can hear more about that in much more detail. It really gives actually some kind of objective meaning to the term musical colour, doesn't it, all of this? So, colour of music. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Caroline. That's great.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on now to a former PhD student, Dr. Henrique Meissner. Hopefully she's here. Aha, excellent, great. Good morning.
Good morning.
And where are you joining from us? Where are you joining us from this morning?
From Groningen in the Netherlands.
Excellent, great. So your topic is expressiveness in music. You're a recorder player and a teacher. That's your instrument. Let's forget the instrument for a second, and I wonder whether you could give me an objective academic definition of your starting point for what is musical expression then.
Okay, my starting point is that in an expressive music performance, the musician conveys their interpretation of the musical character and the musical structure convincingly to a listener.
So, I mean, I guess for listeners, musical expression is something very subjective. But for you, I guess, in terms of research, it has to be something quite objective. But the research that you've done has led to practical application in your teaching. And this is what I want to know, is that because there are very, very standard methods of teaching the mechanics of how to play an instrument, sound production, technique, but musical expression, this is something that feels very elusive, something that's kind of floating up in the clouds. It's something profound and it's not mechanical. How have you come to a point where you can teach expressiveness of music?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the first thing to realize is it has, of course, lots of subjective elements to it. So the meaning or the feeling in a piece of music can be different from person to person, depends very much on your interpretation. So in a way, that's my starting point. And I think that therefore it can be helpful to ask questions about the feeling or the character of the music and how you can show that in playing. Because music performance is so complex, there's a lot that comes into playing music. Technique can be difficult, reading from notation can be difficult, and because of all these difficulties, the learner can be focused completely on, say, the technicality of the music. So, and if that happens, it's very hard to think about what the music means. And in my experience, and also from my research, we've seen that asking a question about, what is the character of this music? Asking a learner, what do you think that this music conveys, is really an important aspect of the teaching, because then suddenly the focus of the students shifts from that focus on technique and notation to musical meaning and how to convey that. So I think that's central.
And why this topic then? Why did you want to start researching expressiveness in music?
It came out of my practice as teacher. So at some point I had a student who would really like to go to conservatoire, and of course she would have to pass an audition. And in some performances she was really expressive, in some performances she wasn't. So to prepare for the audition, we really had to work on expressiveness, because if you play the piece perfectly, but it doesn't sound expressive, you can't get into a conservatoire education. So with that student, I started exploring, how can we work on this? What is the most effective method? What's the most effective approach? And then I found that this asking questions was helpful, and also modeling playing for the student. And following on from that, I asked my colleagues over, during a coffee break, how do you teach expression? And then I realized that everyone gave a different answer. And that's where my research started.
And why Sheffield then? Why come to Sheffield to do this? What's so special about Sheffield for this type of research?
I think that what's special about Sheffield is that there's a very lively music department with interdisciplinary research, people working on music psychology research, music education, lots of practice-related research projects, but also academic projects. And I think for my type of research, this mixture of academic research, music psychology, music education is great.
So the things that you learned then from your research, has that completely transformed how you teach? I mean, do you think that you're a much more advanced, I'm going to use the word, do you think you're a better teacher because of this research?
I've learned a lot about teaching, yes. One of the things I learned is that the music teaching is so much more complex than I realized a few years ago. So that's helpful. And there are lots of things that have come out of my research that I do apply now in my teaching, yes.
Did you use your students, were your students the guinea pigs, if you like, how you gathered this data and how you've done your research? Did you use the students to facilitate your research?
Yes, because when you do research on how to teach expressiveness, of course, straight away it already influences the teaching, because I tried things out in lessons. And in my last research project, which was an action research project, some of my students also participated in the research.
Well, look, Henrique, this for me is, as I was saying, practical application of music. For my line of work, this is what you do is fundamental to what I do, because I know how difficult it is to teach musical expression, and just how the differing opinions you can have from one student to the next about what's expressive and what's not expressive. So this is really fascinating for me. Thank you so much for that introduction to your work. And as I say, there's lots more to explore on the podcast. Henrique Meissner, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our final contributor of the morning, Henrique was a former PhD student. Our final contributor is a current PhD student, and this is Jake Jones. Jake's here. Hello. Good morning, Jake.
Hi Tom, how are you?
And where are you? Where's lockdown for you?
I'm over in Brussels in Belgium.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. So maybe you could give us a quick summary of your interest, because looking at the research you've done, the papers you've written, headphones, I've got mine on, is clearly something that you're fascinated with. And I've noticed that you've investigated a wide range of use, from a use of headphones as a torture device to listening to Kate Bush, which some people may also consider to be a type of torture. Where did this interest come from then? Where did headphones come from? Where did sound and music and space come from?
It's a really good question. Thank you. Yeah. So I think in lots of ways with things like whenever you're studying music, it's always a little bit from your own experience. And it was one of those days, I think, where I was reflecting on listening to music on the tube, and I started thinking about what the difference between private and public spaces might be. We talk about sort of private spaces of being at home, public spaces of being outside, but headphones you can wear outside and still have this quite private experience. So I thought that was quite interesting in terms of space. But then another thing I was thinking about when I was listening was that I had this strange experience of sound as if it was sort of surrounding me, as well as sounding as if it was inside my head. And I couldn't quite work out why that would be, and perhaps even what other people thought about it. So it sort of started from there, really. I've done lots of interviews with different people about their experiences. As you quite rightly say, it's everything from people listening to music, to some people who have been subjected to state-sanctioned torture, through lots of different people who use headphones in their jobs, which is very interesting to learn about as well.
Mm. So, I mean, music and space, that initially brings about the idea of acoustics and venue. Are you listening to music in a concert hall? Are you listening to it in, a small recital room, whatever, or a warehouse, wherever? But your particular focus is on recorded music and how you inject a sense of space, maybe three-dimensional quality into that. Tell us about that then. Tell us about how space works within recorded music.
It's a really good question, and I think I'll probably start. Probably it's easiest to say, how space works in everyday life. Sound and space are sort of inextricably linked, you could say, in everyday life, and there are lots of different scenarios in which our spatial perception of sound is really important to the ways that we can navigate our environment. So things like, for example, if you hear a motorbike coming towards you, which is an example I use in the podcast, you probably want to get out of the way. And our hearing has been sort of, it's evolved over time, we think, as a sort of way in order for us to prioritize threats that are coming towards us. And the way that threats work in terms of our sort of spatial perception in psychology is that, if something, for example, sounds like it's coming towards you, as I say, you'll kind of want to jump out of the way. And in music, in recorded music, people have realized that we have this sort of innate tuning towards the kind of emotional or it's kind of like an adrenaline style experience you can have, and people have manipulated space in sound in those sorts of ways. So, for example, in clubs and things like that, you can take away lots of what we call the high frequencies of sound, and then if you slowly put them back in, it gives you this sense in which the sort of music is rushing towards you, or maybe you're rushing towards the music. And the effect sort of plays on these threat perceiving parts of our ears, and it sort of gives you a bit of an excited response, really. Yeah.
And but for example, recorded music that's used for, you just mentioned a club just now, so music used for a club. There's an example of a Fatboy Slim track that you use in the podcast, which is an amazing example of what you're trying to explain, which people can hear in the podcast. There's that, but then there's also, when you use the sense of space in film music, for example, incidental music to something, that's presumably a very different use of space embedded into the sound, presumably.
It's a really interesting point. I think there's some studies that have shown actually that the ways that we now use space in sort of recorded music, sort of after the 50s, comes from early Hollywood style. So, you sometimes hear these sort of cackling laughs in a sort of massive space, and it seems a bit sort of scary or whatever. These tropes enter into the way in which we sort of use space in music now as well. But you're so right that all of these things, sound design, sound art, and film, they all have these, you're playing with these things like echo and reverb and attenuating certain frequencies. It sounds like things are behind things, all these sorts of things. And people are incredibly clever with the way that they can manipulate 3D audio now. People probably will have noticed at the cinema, things like that, where you have surround sound. I mean, that's completely based on the fact that unlike our eyes, our ears have 360-degree space perception at all times, and not only just in the kind of lateral sense, but also sort of going upwards. We can hear the difference between up and down, back and front, these sorts of things. So you can play a lot now with technologies to enable you to have these sort of quite intense and wonderful experiences of three-dimensional sound.
And one final thing, why is this important then? Why is it important to understand how center space can be used in recorded music? Why do you feel this is important?
Well, we've got some wonderful research at Sheffield that evidences why it's so important. I think in some ways it's wonderful to see artistic responses to the idea of sound and its relationship to space. So Konstantinos Vlachos, who's also in the podcast, is a fantastic composer at Sheffield who works with sort of spatial manipulation in physical space. And one of the most important applications I've seen is Kate Wareham's work, who's another PhD student at Sheffield, who works on situations in which space is quite scarce for people. So situations in which, for example, people are without fixed abode, so living in shared accommodation or supported accommodation, and they use music as a way of sort of carving out a sense of space for themselves, because certain technologies like headphones or loudspeakers enable you to take music into all these different places, and of course to access all of the wonderful memories and associations you have with that music, but in a kind of spatial sense. So in those situations where one maybe doesn't have their own private space in physical space, you can create that space for yourself using virtual space. And to me, that's one of the most exciting and interesting ways in which people are studying this at the moment. And certainly in my research, there's elements of that as well, and sort of how people ultimately are these technologies like headphones, which essentially carve us out from space and might be said to isolate us from wider spaces. How are they changing us as social beings? How are they changing the way that we perceive the wider world? And how can we understand, therefore, sound as a sort of way of knowing in everyday life?
I guess as well, during lockdown, things like headphones have been absolutely critical to people, and how we perceive the wider, larger world. Jake, thank you so much for that. Fascinating what you're up to. Thanks for that insight. And yeah, Jake's podcast, do listen to it, especially the Fatboy Slim track, because it really illustrates exactly what you just said in a brilliant way. That's it. We've come to the end of these chats. Thanks to everyone. Jake Downs, Henrique Meissner, Caroline Curwen. This is almost the end of the podcast launch, or it is for me. In a minute, I'll hand you back to Renee Timmers for a Q&A. But I just want to mention a few things before I leave you this morning. Hopefully, everything you've heard by these researchers made you want to know a lot more. So the podcasts we've been talking about are about to go live, and you can access them through this web address. It's tinyurl.com/MMM-podcasts. I imagine a little dialogue box is going to pop in a minute saying what that was. And if you want to get involved in what's happening at the Music Mind Machine Research Centre, then do contact the directors, or you can look out for events organised by the centre. You can also, there it is, it's just popped up, MMM Podcasts, that's the tiny URL for it. You can also study psychology of music at the University of Sheffield, either undergrad or postgrad level. You can do it on-site or distance learning. And again, that web address you just saw, that's the best place to start for any further information. That's me pretty much done. And like I said right at the start, what's really interested me is that I can see absolutely clear ways that this kind of research can be applied to practical music making. How music is communicated both live and on recording, how you can get people, especially kids, to develop musically expressive skills, and how we should be thinking all the time about the place, the environment, the space in which music is being communicated to audiences. That's critical to what I do. So I just really like to thank Renee and everyone at the Music Mind Machine Research Centre for asking me to have just this tiny part, peripheral involvement in this work. I've learned a huge amount, and I hope I can take that away back to work with me if at any point live music making does actually ever happen again. So thanks again. I'm Tom McKinney, and I'll hand you back to Renee Timmers. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed the interviews with 3 of our current or past PhD students. If this sparked your interest, do have a listen to the full podcasts at tinyurl.com/MMM podcast or consult our website for further information.